Hello, Dr. Cisse covering anatomy and physiology. Today we'll talk about the cerebrum. Now let's review a little bit about the nervous system in general. The nervous system is one of the 11 organ systems in the human body. It is divided into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system has two organs, the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is made of all the nerves coming out of that brain and that spinal cord. If the nerves come out of the brain, we call them cranial nerves. We have 12 pairs of them. If the nerves come out of the spinal cord, we call them spinal nerves, and we have 31 pairs of those. The brain itself, which is part of the central nervous system, has different parts. We have the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem, which is connected to the spinal cord. And the brainstem has four parts: the medulla oblongata, the pons, the midbrain, which will be under here, and the diencephalon. And then we have the cerebellum and the cerebrum. Today, we're going to talk about the cerebrum, which is part of the central nervous system. The cerebrum is the largest and most conspicuous part of the human brain. Here sits all the area that will deal with perception, thought, judgment, and voluntary moral actions. When we decide to do something, we have the willpower to do something, we use the cerebrum. It is divided into two hemispheres, left and right, connected by the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is just fibers of neuron axons connected together. Then the cerebrum has 5 lobes, and these lobes are named after the bone that goes on top of them. Now remember the bone, we got a frontal bone, parietal bone, temporal, occipital bone. So the lobes will have the same thing. So nothing new to learn here, right? So look at that, you got the frontal lobe, the occipital lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, just like the lobe on the bone. And then here you see in the middle, the left and right hemispheres are separated by the longitudinal fissure. Longitudinal fissure. Then we talk about the bumps, gyri, one gyrus, and the groove, sulci, one sulcus. You see, for example, the lateral sulcus, this line here. The fissure is just a deep sulcus. Of course, you see the brainstem here, and then you see the central sulcus, which divides the brain in from rostral to caudal. The cerebrum has gray and white matter, just like in the spinal cord. But in the spinal cord, we say the gray matter is a butterfly-looking thing in the middle, and the white matter is around it. Here it's different. Here, the gray matter form the cortex. The cortex, the very top of the cerebrum. The gray matter is made of neurosoma, like cell bodies, dendrites, and synapses of the neurons. Here, we don't have myelin, right? Or little myelin. But the white matter is made of bundles of axons. So those axons will have myelin coverage on them to express that light color, that white color. Now, in the central nervous system in the brain, we say we have oligodendrocytes. Oligodendrocytes as the myelin cover of the neuron. And these white matter, which are just bundles of axons, will follow a path where, we have information coming in or comment coming down, forming track, like ascending track, descending track, or bundles to connect the brain, the different part of the brain. This is the sagittal cut of the brain, and we look at the medial aspect of it, like in the middle of the brain. You see the cerebrum on top with the cerebral cortex, with the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, the frontal lobe, the occipital lobe here. Then you see the corpus callosum, which is just a band of axon connecting the left and right hemisphere. In the middle here, you see the diencephalon with the thalamus, the epithalamus, and the hypothalamus. Of course, here you see the midbrain, the pons, the medulla oblongata, the cerebellum. But today we'll talk about only the cerebrum, okay? The 5 lobes of the cerebrum are the frontal lobe, And that let's talk about their function here too, right? The frontal lobe deal with the voluntary motor action. It means when you make a decision to do something, you use the frontal lobe. Also motivation, foresight, planning, memory, mood. Like when you feel good, you're thinking about something, you're kind of making, you use the frontal lobe. What about parietal? General sense, integrate general senses like touch, pressure, temperature, and taste. Occipital, visual center, occipital visual. Temporal, hearing and smell. Also some learning, some memory. And then insula, it is hidden by other, you don't see it usually, it's kind of inside, it's dealing with the spoken language, taste and integration of information from visual receptors, things inside the internal organs. Let's talk about the 5 lobes and their function here. You see, for example, the frontal lobe in the front, abstract thought, explicit memory, emotional control. You see that here. Now, it's kind of logic because the central sulcus divide the cerebrum into precentral gyrus here and postcentral. So anything forward, like interior rostral to precentral gyrus, think about when we talk about the spinal cord. Remember in the spinal cord, we said the sensory information comes through the dorsal root, right? Dorsal root, then you go to the ascending tract to go to the brainstem, and then to the cerebrum, if it goes to the 3rd or 4th order neuron. Now think about if we said that the information comes through the back door. It's the same thing here. When you have sensory information, they will come through the post-central, behind central gyrus. If you have command that need to be given, it goes through the precentral, the frontal, the rostral part of the brain. If you take the parietal lobe, taste, somatic sensation, soma. If somebody touches you, like on your muscle, you feel on your skin, that's going to be somatic sensation. Sensory integration means when you feel something. Visual processing, spatial perception, language, so you receive the word, you understand. So anything that's going to be caudal to the central sulcus, you think about sensation and feeling and stuff. But if you come to the precentral, you think about motor, motivation, kind of doing something, kind of planning something, kind of acting on something. And then the occipital, of course, visual, and then temporal, smell, for example, and hearing, that's going to be temporal, remember, it's next to your ear. The verbal memory, and visual and auditory memory and language. And then the insula, which is inside, you don't see it, it's a taste and pain or consciousness, like you know it, basically. Now let's talk about the ventricles. The brain, the cerebrum, also has 4 ventricles. We got 2 lateral, 1/3 and 1/4 ventricle. The choroid plexus are just like blood vessels inside the ventricle that will kind of release, that will make the cerebrospinal fluid by the ependymal cell. So these are the 4 ventricles. You see them here. The 2 lateral, 1/3 and 1/4 ventricle here. The same thing here. You see the 3rd ventricle here. It's kind of lined by the diencephalon, the thalamus. And then you see the 2 lateral ventricle left and right. The ventricle are just like bags that hold water. That water is called cerebrospinal fluid. It's a fluid. It's like a liquid inside the brain. Why is it important? Because the cerebrospinal fluid protects the brain. It also gave a buoyancy. Buoyancy means that you kind of feel it so the brain will efficiently use its space in the skull. And the chemical stability kind of feed the brain and take the waste out of the brain. That's how the cerebrospinal fluid runs. It kind of runs everywhere. And every neuron in these, the billions of neurons, every neuron will receive their nutrient coming through the blood, but the blood doesn't get to the brain. Remember, you have a blood-brain barrier. The actual blood doesn't get there, but the nutrients are sucked out of the blood to be fed to these neurons. So this cerebrospinal fluid will run through from the choroid plexus to the different area, to the 3rd ventricle, coming down to the cerebral aqueduct, going to the 4th ventricle, going around the brain. So it's going to be circulating everywhere, right? Just to feed the different neurons and then to take the weight away from them. So the blood supply, even though the brain represents only 2% of the body weight, it receives 15% of the blood. That's a lot, right? So neurons have to use a lot of energy. I mean, when you think, you use a lot of energy. And then cutting energy out of them, oxygen or food, they can die in few minutes. Look at that, a 10-second blood interruption, right, will cause some damage. Going to 4 minutes, it can have irreversible brain damage. So feeding the brain is very important. Now let's talk about the functional area. Which part of the brain does what? Specifically the Wernicke and the Broca. Now, if you think about it, the Broca area is the motor program of talk. When you are talking physically, you're thinking about saying something. But Wernicke area is the recognition of spoken words. Now, that kind of makes sense. Think about it. If you take the precentral gyrus and the postcentral gyrus here, gyri here, you see that the rostral, the front part, the rostral, is doing with motor, doing something. The caudal, like the back part, is doing with getting something, sensing something, feeling something. That's why understanding word, Wernicke, saying something, Broca. Right here, Wernicke. Let's talk about the general senses now. What are they? Touch, pressure, stretch, heat, cold, pain. Now, for the head, that information is taken by the cranial nerves, the 12 cranial nerves. But for the rest of the body, that sensory information will come through a receptor, going to the spinal cord, going to the ascending tract, remember, to the brainstem, and then if we feel it, we know it, it will go through the post-central gyrus, remember the back part of it. So that's going to be what? The primary somatosensic cortex. So the primary sensory cortex will be the area where we receive the initial information, right? The initial. Here you see the somatosensory cortex, the post-central gyrus. So the post will be on the back side. It kind of makes sense to receive it because the spinal cord receives through the dorsal root, the back door. Remember I said we come in through the back door, we're going through out through the front door. So the sensory homunculus is just a representation of the body on the brain. How much part of the brain is devoted to what part of your body? If you look at it, look at the tongue and the face. It means the tongue and the face have more space on the brain than the rest of the body. Now let's talk about the motor control. After you receive information, you have to process that information. So the intention to contract a muscle, like when I say raise your hand and you try to raise your hand, that intention, that feeling come from the motor association premotor area of the frontal lobe. So we plan behavior there. Then when we doing it, the fact that you kind of raise your hand, it will kind of come from the precentral gyrus. Again here, the post-central gyrus and the precentral gyrus. The precentral is doing, the post is receiving. Here also, doing something, the motor command, the motor action, look at that here. You have the face and the tongue that have more representation on the brain than the rest of the body. What about the spatial senses? Vision, taste, and smell. The vision, we talk about is occipital lobe. These are spatial senses because they are done by spatial organs, limited to the head, right? So what about the taste and smell? The gustatory, which is the taste, the post-central gyrus. Why post? Because it makes sense. Remember, the post is the information coming in. So when you taste something, you kind of receive the information. When you smell, you receive information. That's going to be, smell is olfactory. All this will be what? The post-central. Hearing and equilibrium. Again, the primary auditory cortex. The primary auditory cortex, you kind of hear something. That part allows you to hear. But the auditory association allows you to connect the words, to make sense out of the word. What about the equilibrium, which is the sense of equilibrium, has also an association cortex. Here are the visual, the representation again of the functional areas of the brain. You see the Broca area, the Wernicke, just to show you that the brain has specific area dealing with specific job in your body, right? Look at the olfactory association area. It means when you smell something, you know it's an orange, it's not an apple. The prefrontal cortex, the Broca area, the motor association area. because the primary motor makes you do something. The motor association makes you do something that makes sense, kind of balance thing. The primary gustatory cortex, right? Primary, you taste something. But when you got association cortex, it means you know what you're tasting. You know it's not banana, it's not an apple. Right. To conclude, the cerebrum, which is the one here, is part of the central nervous system, right? It has gyri, sulci, and then what else? We have different areas that will do different job, right? So I hope this one will give us better idea about the cerebrum, and I'll see you in class. Thank you very much.